Welcome, dear listener, to another journey into the mysterious and forgotten corners of human history. I'm your guide through the shadows of time, and tonight we explore one of the most intriguing and controversial topics in ancient history, the bloodlines of the Anunnaki. As you settle into comfort, allow your breathing to slow. Let the weight of the day fall away from your shoulders. Tonight, we travel back through millennia to a time when the gods walked among mortals, when the boundary between heaven and earth was not so clearly drawn, and when the origins of human civilization were being written in ways that would echo through all of recorded history. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Feel the pillow beneath your head, the blanket around you. You are safe here, warm and protected, as we venture together into the ancient past. Chapter 1. Before the dawn of memory. In the beginning, before the first cities rose from the plains of Mesopotamia, before the first written words were pressed into wet clay, there existed stories. These stories were passed from generation to generation, whispered in the darkness around fires, sung in the temples, encoded in ritual and ceremony. The land between two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, cradled the earliest known civilization. But even the Sumerians, those remarkable people who invented writing, mathematics, and complex urban society, claimed that their knowledge came from before, from those who came down from the heavens. Let your mind drift back beyond the edge of recorded history, to a time that exists only in myth and legend, yet feels strangely familiar, as if encoded in the deepest parts of our collective memory. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki. The name itself carries weight, translating roughly to those who came from heaven to earth, or princely offspring. In the ancient texts, they were described as gods, as creators, as teachers who brought civilization to humanity. But who were they really? This question has haunted scholars, mystics, and seekers of truth for generations. Breathe deeply. Let the rhythm of your breath match the rhythm of this ancient story. According to the oldest cuneiform tablets, the Anunnaki were a group of deities who descended to Earth in the distant past. The ancient texts describe them with remarkable specificity, not as ethereal spirits, but as beings with physical form, with needs and desires, with family structures and hierarchies that mirror our own. The chief among them was Anu, whose name means heaven. He was said to rule from a celestial abode, rarely descending to earth but maintaining authority over all that transpired below. His children would become the most important figures in the Sumerian pantheon. Enki, whose name means Lord of the Earth, was described as a god of wisdom, water, and creation. In the myths, he was portrayed as a friend to humanity, a teacher who shared knowledge that the other gods wished to keep hidden. He was said to have shaped humanity from clay and blood, breathing consciousness into the first humans. Enlil, whose name means Lord of the Wind, was portrayed quite differently. He was the god of air, storm, and authority, often depicted as stern and powerful, maintaining order but sometimes with harsh judgment. Many texts describe tension between Enlil and Enki regarding humanity's fate. Feel yourself sinking deeper into relaxation as we explore these ancient relationships. The Anunnaki were not solitary gods dwelling in abstract heavens. The texts describe a complex society with rankings, assignments, and purposes. Some descended to Earth to mine precious resources. Others maintained operations in the heavens. They had children with each other, they argued. They formed alliances and rivalries. And most significantly for our story tonight, they had children with humans. This is where the bloodlines begin. Chapter 2. The Divine Unions. Let your body grow heavier now, sinking into the surface beneath you. We move deeper into the mystery. Throughout the ancient texts of Mesopotamia, and later in texts from other cultures, we find repeated accounts of divine beings taking human partners. These were not metaphorical unions, but were described in genealogical detail, tracked through generations, claimed by royal families as the source of their right to rule. The most famous text describing this comes from the Book of Genesis, which preserves much older Mesopotamian traditions. In chapter 6 we read of the Nephilim, the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. These beings were said to be mighty, renowned, different from ordinary humans. The word Nephilim itself is fascinating. Scholars debate its meaning. Some translate it as fallen ones, others as those who descended, still others as giants. Perhaps all of these meanings carried truth. Your breathing is slow and steady now, your heartbeat calm and rhythmic. The ancient world unfolds before your mind's eye. In Sumerian texts, we find similar accounts, but with more detail. The goddess Ninhursag was said to have engineered early humans, combining the essence of the Anunnaki with that of primitive hominids that already existed on Earth. These first created humans were designed as workers, beings intelligent enough to understand instructions but initially incapable of reproduction. But then came the rebellion of compassion. Enki, according to the myths, looked upon these early humans with sympathy. He modified their design, granting them the ability to reproduce, to learn, to pass knowledge from generation to generation. This act angered the other Anunnaki, particularly Enlil, who saw it as a violation of the natural order. The myths tell us that some Anunnaki then went further, taking human partners not for procreation of workers, but out of genuine desire and connection. Their children were different, stronger, more intelligent, living longer than ordinary humans, possessing qualities that seemed to bridge the divine and the mortal. These hybrid offspring were given special names, special roles. They became the first kings, the first priests, the first culture bearers, and their descendants would claim divine right to rule over others. Let this story wash over you like a gentle wave. No need to hold on to any detail too tightly, just let it flow. The Sumerian King List, one of the most intriguing historical documents from the ancient world, describes kings who ruled for impossibly long periods before a great flood. One king is said to have ruled for 2,800 years, another for 36,000 years. After the flood, the reigns become shorter, but still extraordinary by our standards. Hundreds of years rather than thousands. Were these numbers metaphorical? Did they represent dynasties rather than individuals? Or do they point to something else? A memory of rulers who were not entirely human, whose lifespans reflected their hybrid nature. The text explicitly states that kingship descended from heaven. This was not merely a poetic turn of phrase in the Sumerian worldview, but a literal claim about the source of royal authority and bloodline. Chapter 3. The Bloodlines Take Root. Your eyelids are heavy now, so heavy. You might notice the sensations in your body fading, becoming distant as the story becomes more vivid in your mind. As civilizations developed throughout Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the surrounding regions, the concept of divine bloodlines became central to political and social organization. Pharaohs in Egypt claimed descent from the gods, particularly from Ra and later from Horus. They married within their own families to keep the divine blood pure, a practice that would be echoed by royal families throughout history. In Egypt, the pharaoh was not merely appointed by the gods or favored by them. The pharaoh was considered a living god, a direct descendant of the divine, carrying the blood of the Anunnaki or their Egyptian equivalents in his veins. The royal regalia, the symbols of power, were not just ceremonial. The crook and flail, the cobra crown, the false beard, these were said to be markers of divine inheritance, tools and symbols that only one of the proper bloodline could truly wield. Let your mind drift through the great temples of ancient Egypt. Massive stone columns reaching toward the sky. Walls covered in hieroglyphs telling the stories of divine ancestry. The smell of incense, the sound of chanting priests. You are there but only as an observer, safe and distant. The priesthoods that maintained these temples were also hereditary. Knowledge passed from father to son, mother to daughter, carefully guarded within family lines that claimed descent from the gods. The highest priests were often royal family members, and the highest priestesses were princesses or queens. This pattern repeated throughout the ancient world. In Babylon, kings traced their ancestry back to divine unions. In Assyria, the royal bloodline was considered sacred and unbreakable. In Persia, the concept would later evolve but maintain its essential character. Certain families carried something in their blood that set them apart. But what was this something? What did these ancient peoples believe they had inherited? According to the myths, the hybrid children of divine and human unions possessed several key characteristics. They lived longer than ordinary humans, sometimes for centuries. They possessed unusual wisdom and knowledge, understanding of sciences and arts that seemed to come naturally rather than requiring teaching. They had the ability to communicate with the divine realm, serving as intermediaries between gods and humans, and they possessed certain physical markers, unusual height, striking features, sometimes described as literally glowing or radiating presence. Your body's completely relaxed now, every muscle soft and loose. The ancient world feels as real as the room around you, perhaps more so. The children of these hybrid beings, in turn, passed on diminished but still significant traits to their offspring, and so the bloodlines spread, becoming diluted over generations but never entirely disappearing, or so the legends claim. Certain families maintained more of this divine heritage than others, either through careful marriage practices or through occasional renewal of the bloodline through new unions with the divine beings. This created a hierarchy that would persist for thousands of years, those who carried the strongest divine blood at the top, those with weakened or distant traces in the middle, and those with no claim to such ancestry at the bottom. Chapter 4. The Hidden Knowledge, Sink Deeper Still. There is no effort here, only the gentle flow of story and the comfort of rest. The bloodlines were about more than just political power or physical characteristics. At their heart was knowledge, secret knowledge that was passed down through these special families, knowledge that supposedly originated with the Anunnaki themselves. In Sumerian tradition, this knowledge was vast and comprehensive. The Anunnaki were credited with teaching humanity agriculture, showing them which plants to cultivate and how to irrigate fields. They taught metalworking, revealing the secrets of copper, bronze, and eventually iron. They taught astronomy, sharing the movements of celestial bodies and the meaning of the stars. But some knowledge, according to the myths, was meant to remain hidden, shared only within certain bloodlines. The Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text that preserves even older traditions, describes this hidden knowledge in detail. It tells of divine beings called the Watchers, who descended to Earth and took human wives. These Watchers taught humanity secrets that were said to be forbidden: the making of weapons and armour, the use of cosmetics and beautification, the roots and powers of plants for magic and medicine, the reading of celestial, signs, and the arts of divination. Let the words flow over you like water. You are floating in the river of this ancient story. According to this text, the teaching of these secrets was a violation of divine law. The knowledge was supposed to remain in heaven, but the Watchers' love for their human partners and children led them to share it anyway. The result, the text says, was corruption and violence spreading across the earth, eventually leading to divine judgment in the form of a great flood. But the knowledge didn't die in the flood. The hybrid offspring, the giants and mighty ones, perished in the waters, but some of their human relatives survived, particularly Noah and his family, who were described as pure in their generations, yet still possessed knowledge of what had come before. The text suggests that Noah's sons carried both the memory and, some claim, the diluted blood of the antediluvian world into the new age after the flood, and with them came fragments of the forbidden knowledge. Throughout history, secret societies and mystical orders have claimed to preserve this ancient wisdom. The mystery schools of Egypt and Greece, the Gnostic traditions of the early Christian era, the Hermetic traditions of the medieval period, the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, all, in various ways, claimed connection to an ancient tradition of hidden knowledge that stretched back to the time of the gods. Your breathing is so slow now, so peaceful. The boundary between sleeping and waking grows thin. Many of these orders also placed emphasis on bloodline and initiation, suggesting that certain families carried a heritage that made them more capable of understanding and wielding the ancient wisdom. Initiation could bring outsiders into the tradition, but those born into the proper families were said to have a natural affinity for the hidden arts. What was this knowledge exactly? The texts are often deliberately obscure, speaking in symbols and allegories, but certain themes repeat: understanding of natural forces and how to manipulate them, knowledge of healing and life extension, comprehension of the true nature of reality and consciousness, the ability to communicate with non-physical entities or dimensions, and the secrets of death and what lies beyond. These were said to be the inheritance of the Anunnaki bloodlines, passed down through millennia, hidden within mystery traditions, encoded in myths and symbols, waiting for those with eyes to see and ears to hear. Chapter 5. The Great Flood, and After You Are Drifting Now, floating between wakefulness and dreams. The story continues, but you need not hold on to every word. Let them wash through you. Nearly every ancient culture has a flood myth. The Sumerians told of Ziusudra, who survived a great deluge sent by the gods. The Babylonians told of Utnapishtim, who built a great boat and preserved life through the waters. The The Hebrews told of Noah, the Greeks told of Deucalion, the Hindus spoke of Manu. Native American tribes have flood stories. Australian Aboriginal traditions include them. From Mesopotamia to China to the Americas, the theme repeats with remarkable consistency. In most versions, the flood is sent as divine judgment, a cleansing of a corrupted world, and in many versions the corruption is specifically linked to the improper mixing of divine and human bloodlines, to forbidden knowledge being shared, to a violation of cosmic order. But the flood, while devastating, did not end the story of the bloodlines. According to the traditions, it marked a reset, a new beginning, but one that still carried genetic and knowledge legacies from before. Let yourself sink deeper into rest as we explore what came after. The Bible describes Noah as perfect in his generations, a phrase that has puzzled scholars. Some interpret this as moral perfection, but others note that the Hebrew might suggest genetic purity, that Noah's bloodline had remained unmixed with the Nephilim hybrid lines that had supposedly corrupted humanity. But the story doesn't end with Noah. Genesis chapter 10 describes his sons spreading across the earth, founding the nations, and then, in a passage that mirrors the earlier account of divine human unions, it describes giants appearing again in the land after the flood. The Nephilim appear once more, suggesting either that the bloodline survived through the flood somehow, or that new unions between divine and human occurred in the post-flood world. The Canaanite peoples encountered by the Israelites in their conquest of the Promised Land were said to include giants, descendants of Anak, who the texts explicitly connect to the Nephilim. King Og of Bashan is described as the last of the Rephaim, a race of giants with a bed 13 feet long. Goliath, the Philistine warrior defeated by David, was described as over 9 feet tall from a family of giants. Whether these accounts are literal or exaggerated, they reflect a persistent belief in the ancient Near East that certain bloodlines carried characteristics that set them apart from ordinary humans, and that these bloodlines traced back to the time before the flood, to the era of divine human unions. Your muscles are loose and heavy. Your mind drifts easily through these ancient tales. In the millennia after the flood, civilization rebuilt and flourished. The bloodlines that claimed divine ancestry reorganized themselves, establishing new kingdoms and empires. Egypt rose to glory, with its pharaohs claiming descent from the gods and implementing elaborate marriage practices to maintain bloodline purity. Mesopotamian city-states grew into great empires, each ruling dynasty tracing its legitimacy to divine appointment and descent. The idea of divine right to rule, which would persist all the way into the modern era in Europe, had its roots in these ancient claims of bloodline. Kings were not merely powerful humans who had seized authority, they were fundamentally different, beings carrying the blood of gods, serving as intermediaries between heaven and earth. This belief shaped everything: architecture, with temples and palaces designed to reflect heavenly patterns; law, with kings serving as divine lawgivers; warfare, with battles understood as cosmic struggles; and daily life with rigid hierarchies reflecting the divine order supposedly established by the Anunnaki in the distant past. Chapter 6. The Royal Bloodlines of Egypt. Let the ancient world become vivid in your mind as your body rests completely still and peaceful. Of all the ancient civilizations that claim divine bloodlines, perhaps none did so more consistently, or with more elaborate supporting mythology than Egypt. For over 3,000 years, the institution of the divine pharaoh stood at the center of Egyptian civilization, and at the heart of that institution was the concept of divine blood. The pharaohs traced their ultimate ancestry to the gods themselves, specifically to Ra, the sun god, and to Horus, the sky god and protector of kingship. According to Egyptian mythology, the first pharaohs were literally gods incarnate, divine beings who took physical form to rule over Egypt. Later pharaohs were understood to be their direct descendants, carrying the divine essence in their blood, though in diminished concentration. Let yourself float as we explore the mysteries of Egypt. You are safe and warm, travelling through time in perfect comfort. This divine bloodline was so precious that extraordinary measures were taken to preserve it. Pharaohs married their sisters, their half-sisters, sometimes even their daughters. This practice, which would be taboo in most cultures, was understood in Egypt as necessary to keep the divine blood concentrated and pure. The pharaoh needed to marry someone of equivalent status, and only another member of the royal family carrying the same divine bloodline was considered suitable. The great royal wife, the principal queen, held immense importance. She was not merely the king's consort, but was understood to be the vessel through which the divine bloodline would continue. Her children, especially the eldest son, would inherit not just political power, but the very essence of divinity that made the pharaoh legitimate. Queen Hatshepsut, one of the few women to rule as pharaoh rather than as queen consort, went to great lengths to legitimize her rule by emphasizing her divine bloodline. Temple inscriptions tell the story of her divine conception, describing how the god Amun took the form of her father Thutmose I and united with her mother Amos. This made Hatshepsut not merely the daughter of a pharaoh, but the literal daughter of a god, strengthening her claim to rule in her own right. Such divine conception stories were common in Egyptian royal propaganda, but they were more than mere political theatre. They reflected a genuine belief system in which the boundaries between divine and human, between heaven and earth, remained permeable for those of the royal bloodline. Your eyes are closed now, or if open, they see nothing of the waking world. You are deep in the realm of rest and ancient memory. The physical bodies of pharaohs were treated with extraordinary care after death. The elaborate mummification process was not merely about preservation, but about preparing the divine king for his return to the realm of the gods. The pharaoh would journey through the underworld, face trials and challenges, and ultimately reunite with the divine source from which the royal bloodline originated. Inside the pyramids and royal tombs, texts were inscribed to aid this journey. The pyramid texts and later the coffin texts described the pharaoh's transformation after death, his rejoining the company of the gods, his taking his place among the stars. These were not metaphors, but descriptions of what the Egyptians believed literally occurred to those who carried divine blood. The tombs also contained remarkable artifacts that speak to the Egyptians' understanding of the divine nature of their kings. Boats to sail through the celestial realm, jewellery and regalia that only beings of mixed divine human nature could properly use, texts describing secret names and words of power that gave the pharaoh authority over natural and supernatural forces. Modern scholars often interpret these practices and beliefs as superstition or primitive religion, but perhaps we should consider that they reflected a different understanding of reality, one in which some humans truly were different from others, carrying genetic legacies that granted them capabilities beyond the ordinary. Chapter 7. The Dragon Bloodlines of Asia. Your journey through time continues. Breathe slowly. Let each breath carry you deeper into rest and into story. While Egypt developed its concept of divine pharaonic bloodlines, on the other side of the ancient world, in China and the Far East, parallel concepts emerged. Here, the language was different. The specific deities had different names, but the core idea remained remarkably similar. Certain royal families carried bloodlines that traced to divine or otherworldly origins. In China, emperors claimed descent from the Yellow Emperor, Huangdi, a legendary figure described as partially divine and credited with numerous cultural innovations. But more significantly, emperors were said to be children of the dragon, carrying dragon blood in their veins. The dragon in Chinese tradition was not the evil beast of European legends, but a benevolent and powerful being associated with wisdom, power, and the heavens. To carry dragon blood was to carry the mandate of heaven, the divine right to rule. Let the image of a golden dragon fill your mind, serpentine and graceful, flowing through clouds. You feel its ancient power, but you are safe, merely observing. The imperial families of China practiced strict rules about bloodline preservation. The emperor took many wives and concubines, not merely for pleasure but to ensure that the dragon bloodline would continue. Complex genealogies were maintained, tracking not just the immediate royal family, but all those who carried even distant claims to imperial ancestry. In Japan, similar beliefs developed. The imperial family claimed unbroken descent from the sun goddess Amaterasu, making each emperor a living descendant of divinity. This concept survived all the way until 1946, when Emperor Hirohito, under pressure from American occupation forces, publicly renounced his divinity. Yet even today, the Japanese imperial family maintains the world's oldest continuous hereditary monarchy, unbroken for over 2,600 years according to traditional dating, and many Japanese still regard the emperor with special reverence tied to this ancestral tradition. The concept of divine or semi-divine ruling bloodlines appeared throughout Asia. In Korea, the ancient Goguryeo kingdom claimed its founders were born from divine unions. In Southeast Asia, the god kings of Angkor combined Hindu and Buddhist concepts to create elaborate cosmologies in which the king served as the earthly reflection of divine principles, his bloodline carefully maintained and protected. Drift deeper now. The ancient world and the modern world blend together. Time becomes fluid. Legends throughout Asia speak of the Nagas, serpent beings of great wisdom and power who occasionally took human form and interbred with humanity. These stories parallel the Anunnaki traditions of Mesopotamia and the Dragon Emperor traditions of China. Different cultures, different names, but a consistent theme of non-human intelligent beings creating hybrid bloodlines that became the basis for rulership. In India, the Vedas and later texts describe the Asuras and Devas, powerful beings who predate ordinary humans and who sometimes engaged with humanity. The great heroes of the Mahabharata and Ramayana are explicitly described as having divine parentage. Arjuna is the son of the god Indra, Karna is the son of the sun god Surya, and so on. These were not metaphorical relationships, but were presented as literal genetic facts that explained the hero's extraordinary abilities. The concept of the avatar, a divine being taking physical form, emerged from these traditions, as did the complex caste system that assigned people to different social levels, based partly on concepts of spiritual and bloodline purity. The Brahmins, the priestly caste at the top, claimed descent from the wise ones who first received the Vedas, suggesting a bloodline component to their authority. Chapter 8. The Nephilim in the Biblical World. Your body is at complete rest. Your mind drifts peacefully through these ancient mysteries. No need to remember every detail. Just let the story flow. We return now to the Mediterranean world and the biblical narrative, which preserves many traditions about divine bloodlines, often with a more cautious or negative perspective than other ancient cultures. The Hebrew Bible treats the concept of divine human hybrids with ambivalence. While acknowledging that such beings existed, the Nephilim before the flood, the giants in Canaan, the mighty warriors of old, the texts generally portray this mixing as problematic, a violation of the proper order of creation. Yet even in this framework, bloodline remains supremely important. Abraham is chosen to father a special nation, and his descendants through Isaac and Jacob become the people of Israel, set apart and distinct from all other peoples. While the Bible doesn't frame this as divine blood in the same way Egyptian or Mesopotamian texts might, it does establish the Israelites as having a unique relationship with God based on descent from specific ancestors. The royal line of David becomes particularly significant. God makes a covenant with David that his descendants will sit on the throne forever, establishing a bloodline with eternal significance. Later Jewish and Christian traditions invest this bloodline with messianic importance. The awaited saviour must come from David's line, must carry that specific ancestry. Let these ancient royal lines flow through your mind like a river. You float gently on the surface, observing but not drowning in detail. The Bible contains numerous genealogies, extensive family trees that modern readers often skip over, but which held immense importance for ancient readers. These genealogies established identity, legitimacy, and connection to the promises and covenants of the past. They traced the bloodlines that mattered, showing who was descended from whom, who carried which tribal identity, who had the right to certain roles and privileges. Interestingly, several biblical genealogies include references to giants and mighty warriors, people described as unusual or exceptional. The Anakim, descendants of Anak, are described as giants who made the Israelite spies feel like grasshoppers in comparison. The Rephaim are mentioned as an ancient people of great stature. King Og, as mentioned earlier, is described as the last of these giants. These references suggest that, even in the biblical tradition, which generally takes a cautionary view of divine-human mixing, there was an acknowledgement that something unusual existed in certain bloodlines, that some people carried genetic legacies that made them physically and perhaps otherwise different from ordinary humans. The Philistines, one of Israel's persistent enemies, seem to have had a concentration of giants among them. Goliath and his brothers were Philistines, described as extraordinarily large and powerful warriors. Some scholars have suggested that the Philistines, who came from across the Mediterranean, may have brought with them bloodlines or traditions connected to the ancient maritime cultures that preserved memories of the antediluvian world. Breathe deeply, let tension flow out with each exhale. The ancient world is all around you in your mind, but you are merely an observer, safe and distant. Chapter 9. The Royal Bloodlines of Europe. As we move forward through history, we come to Europe, where the concept of divine royal bloodlines would take on new forms while maintaining deep connections to the ancient traditions. The royal families of Europe did not explicitly claim descent from the Anunnaki. Christianity had become dominant, and such claims would be heretical. But they found other ways to establish the special nature of their bloodlines and their divine right to rule. Many European royal families traced their ancestry back to ancient heroes and even to pagan gods, even after the coming of Christianity. The Anglo-Saxon kings of England claimed descent from Woden, the Germanic equivalent of Odin. The French Merovingian dynasty surrounded themselves with legends of special bloodlines and mystical powers. Scandinavian royal families explicitly claimed descent from the Norse gods until forced to abandon such claims by Christian conversion. Let yourself drift into the medieval world. Stone castles rising against grey skies, the sound of hooves on cobblestones, the flickering of torchlight in great halls. The concept of the divine right of kings reached its peak in medieval and early modern Europe. Kings were not merely political leaders, but were understood to be appointed by God, anointed in religious ceremonies that marked them as special. Their bloodline carried this divine appointment. It passed from father to son, sanctified by the church but understood to exist independent of individual character or virtue. European royalty practiced elaborate marriage strategies to maintain bloodline purity and concentrate power. Royal families married only other royal families, creating a tangled web of relationships across the continent. By the early 20th century, most European monarchs were cousins of varying degrees, all descended from a limited pool of ancestors. This obsession with bloodline led to genetic problems. The Habsburg jaw, haemophilia among Russian and British royals, other inherited conditions that weakened the very bloodlines the families were trying to preserve. Yet the belief in bloodline supremacy remained powerful, shaping European politics and society for centuries. You are so relaxed now, so deeply at rest. The story continues, but you need not strain to follow every word. Let it wash over you like a lullaby. Parallel to the official royal bloodlines, Europe developed numerous legends of hidden bloodlines, secret lineages that carried special spiritual or mystical significance. The most famous of these is the Holy Grail legend, and its associated theories about the bloodline of Jesus. According to various medieval romances and later esoteric traditions, Jesus did not remain celibate but married Mary Magdalene and had children. These children and their descendants were said to have been protected and hidden, their bloodline preserved. Through the centuries, perhaps merging with European royal families, particularly in France. This theory, while lacking historical evidence, became enormously popular in certain mystical circles and eventually in popular culture. It represents a Christianized version of the ancient concept of divine bloodlines, a way to claim special ancestry and inheritance within a Christian framework. Similar legends emerged around various mystical and esoteric orders. The Rosicrucians claimed connection to ancient wisdom traditions and suggested that certain bloodlines carried particular aptitude for spiritual awakening and alchemical transformation. Freemasonry, while not explicitly bloodline-based, incorporated symbols and rituals that harkened back to ancient mystery traditions and suggested that some carried hidden knowledge passed down through generations. These traditions kept alive, in coded form, the ancient ideas about bloodlines carrying special characteristics, about certain families being inheritors of wisdom and power that originated in the distant past, perhaps even in the time of the Anunnaki themselves. Chapter 10. The Aristocratic Networks. Your mind wanders now through corridors of power, through the connected families that have shaped history. You are dreaming while awake, or waking while dreaming. The boundary dissolves. If we step back and look at European history, we see that while kings and queens occupied the thrones, around them operated an aristocratic class that also jealously guarded their bloodlines and their status. The nobility of Europe formed an interconnected network of families, each tracing their ancestry back through centuries, each maintaining detailed genealogies that established their place in the hierarchy. These aristocratic families were not merely wealthy or powerful, they understood themselves to be fundamentally different from common people. Blue blood, they called it, the sangre azul of Spanish nobility, suggesting that their very blood was a different colour, that something in their physical makeup distinguished them from peasants and merchants. This belief justified vast inequality and rigid social systems. One could not become nobility through merit or achievement, except in rare cases where the monarch granted titles. Nobility was a matter of birth, of bloodline, of descent from the right ancestors. Let the images flow: grand estates, portraits of ancestors lining walls, coat of arms, family mottos, the weight of centuries of ancestry. The aristocracy intermarried constantly, creating dense networks of family relationships. A French count might marry a German baroness, their children marrying English lords and Italian principesses, each marriage carefully arranged to preserve status, consolidate land and power, and keep the bloodlines concentrated within the aristocratic class. This created a European elite that, while divided by nationality and language, shared common ancestors, common culture, and common understanding of their special place in society. They were, in their own understanding, the inheritors of something precious and ancient, something that ultimately traced back to the great bloodlines of antiquity, to the divine royal families of Egypt and Mesopotamia, to the age of the Anunnaki. The aristocratic families also maintained libraries, archives, and traditions of esoteric knowledge. The great houses were centres of learning, patronage of arts and sciences, and preservation of ancient texts and traditions. Knowledge that might otherwise have been lost was kept alive in aristocratic libraries and private collections. Some families claimed to maintain specific mystical or occult traditions passed down through their bloodlines. They practiced astrology, alchemy, and other hermetic arts, understanding themselves as inheritors of the ancient wisdom traditions that supposedly stretched back to antediluvian times. Your breathing is barely perceptible now. You're on the edge of sleep, hovering in that perfect liminal space where consciousness becomes fluid and stories feel like memories. Chapter 11. The Secret Societies. Parallel to the official structures of royalty and aristocracy, Europe and the wider world saw the development of numerous secret societies that placed great emphasis on bloodline, initiation, and the preservation of ancient knowledge. The Knights Templar, founded during the Crusades, became the subject of countless legends about hidden treasures, secret wisdom, and special bloodlines. After their official suppression in the 14th century, legends spread that they had gone underground, preserving mysteries learned in the Holy Land, perhaps even protecting the bloodline of Christ. Let your mind drift through torchlit ceremonies, robed figures, ancient symbols, whispered oaths. You're safe, merely observing from a distance. Freemasonry emerged in its modern form in the early 18th century, but claimed roots reaching back to the builders of Solomon's Temple and beyond. While theoretically open to any man of good character, Masonry incorporated elaborate degree systems, secret knowledge revealed in stages, and symbols drawn from ancient Egypt, ancient Israel, and Hermetic traditions. The higher degrees of Masonry included references to the Knights Templar, to ancient mysteries, to wisdom traditions supposedly descending from before the flood. While Masonry did not make explicit bloodline requirements, certain lodges and higher degrees were dominated by aristocratic members, and the system as a whole carried the implication that some men were more capable than others of understanding the deepest mysteries. The Rosicrucians appeared in the early 17th century with mysterious manifestos claiming to represent an ancient brotherhood of mystics who possessed special knowledge of alchemy, healing, and spiritual transformation. The manifestos hinted at bloodlines and special preparation that allowed some individuals to access wisdom that would be dangerous or incomprehensible to ordinary people. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, numerous other esoteric orders emerged: the Bavarian Illuminati, various orders of ceremonial magic, theosophical societies, and more. Each claimed in some way to preserve or have rediscovered ancient wisdom, and many placed significance on heredity, suggesting that certain bloodlines carried particular aptitudes for spiritual development or magical practice. You're so deeply relaxed. The boundary between the story and dreams dissolves. Perhaps you are already dreaming. It doesn't matter. Just rest. These secret societies served multiple functions. For some members, they were social clubs for the elite. For others, they were genuine spiritual paths. For still others, they were networks of power and influence that operated behind the scenes of official politics and society. Conspiracy theories have long suggested that secret societies of this type have manipulated world events, working toward hidden agendas, preserving ancient bloodlines and knowledge while controlling the masses who remain ignorant of true history. Whether such theories have merit or are simply compelling narratives, they reflect the persistent human fascination with the idea that reality has hidden layers, that some people know and carry things that others do not, that bloodlines and ancient inheritances continue to shape the world in unseen ways. Chapter 12. The Anunnaki Interpretation. Now we drift into more speculative territory, into interpretations of these ancient bloodlines that emerged in the 20th century and continue to evolve today. Your mind is free to wander, to dream, to consider possibilities without needing to judge or conclude. In the mid-20th century, certain researchers and writers began proposing that the ancient myths should be read not as mythology or primitive religion, but as garbled accounts of historical events. What if the Anunnaki were not gods in a supernatural sense, but rather an advanced extraterrestrial race that came to Earth in the distant past? This interpretation, popularized by authors like Zecharia Sitchin, suggested that the Sumerian texts were describing actual encounters between humans and beings from another world. The Anunnaki came to Earth, according to this theory, to mine gold and other resources. They initially used primitive humans as laborers, but eventually upgraded humanity through genetic engineering, creating the hybrid bloodlines described in the myths. Let this possibility wash over you like a wave. No need to accept or reject it. Just let it be part of the story as you drift towards sleep. According to this interpretation, the great leap forward in human civilization that occurred around 6,000 years ago, the sudden emergence of writing, mathematics, complex government, and monumental architecture in Sumer, was not natural development, but rather the result of knowledge transferred by the Anunnaki to their hybrid human Anunnaki offspring. These hybrid bloodlines became the first kings and priests. They carried genetic advantages, greater intelligence, longer lifespan, perhaps abilities that seemed miraculous to ordinary humans, and they carried knowledge directly from the Anunnaki about technology, science, governance, and the nature of reality. The Great Flood, in this interpretation, was an attempt by some of the Anunnaki to wipe out humanity, or at least the hybrid bloodlines. But the effort failed, or was sabotaged by Anunnaki like Enki, who were sympathetic to humanity. Some humans survived, carrying both the genes and the knowledge forward into the post-flood world. The bloodlines that claimed descent from the gods, from the Anunnaki, were not making mythological claims but stating genetic fact. The pharaohs really did carry different genetics than their subjects. The divine right of kings was based on measurable differences in DNA. The hidden knowledge of the mystery schools really was information about science and reality that originated with a non-human intelligence. Your eyelids are so heavy. Perhaps they have already closed. The story continues in your mind, becoming part of your dreams. This interpretation has been challenged by mainstream scholars on numerous grounds. The translations of Sumerian texts that underpin it are considered questionable by many Assyriologists. The science proposed doesn't align with current understanding of genetics and human evolution. The whole framework requires accepting the existence of ancient astronauts, for which physical evidence remains elusive. Yet the theory has proven remarkably persistent and popular. Why? Perhaps because it provides an explanation for the mysteries of ancient civilizations, for the remarkable sophistication of the earliest cultures, for the strange and specific claims about bloodlines found across different ancient traditions. Or perhaps it appeals because it reframes the old stories in ways that feel more plausible to modern minds than traditional religious or mythological interpretations. Gods become aliens. Magic becomes advanced technology. Mythology becomes history. The bloodlines remain special, but special in ways that seem to fit better with a scientific worldview. Chapter 13. Modern Bloodline Theories. As you rest, comfortable and safe, we explore how bloodline theories have evolved in modern times, taking on new forms while maintaining ancient patterns. In the 20th century, the notion of special bloodlines took dark turns. Racial theories that attempted to create hierarchies based on genetics and ancestry led to immense suffering. The Nazi ideology of Aryan supremacy, though wrapped in pseudoscientific language, was at its core another iteration of the ancient claim that certain bloodlines were superior to others, destined to rule, carrying special characteristics. The results were catastrophic, discrediting biological determinism and bloodline supremacy in mainstream thought. Yet in various fringe movements, the ideas persisted, simply going underground or being reframed. Let the darkness of this history pass through your awareness without disturbing your peace. These are just shadows in the story. You remain safe and at rest. In recent decades, with advances in genetics, new versions of bloodline theories have emerged. DNA testing has allowed people to trace their ancestry with unprecedented precision. Some discovered genetic markers that trace to ancient populations. Others found unexpected connections to historical figures or royal lineages. The discovery that most people of European descent carry small percentages of Neanderthal DNA, and that some populations carry DNA from other archaic human species like Denisovans, has added scientific grounding to the idea that humanity is not genetically uniform, that we carry inheritances from different ancient populations. Some researchers have speculated about the negative blood type, which is rare globally but concentrated in certain populations, particularly in Europe and especially among the Basque people. Various theories suggest this blood type might be a remnant of ancient bloodlines, perhaps even evidence of the hybrid descent claimed in ancient texts. Mainstream science offers more prosaic explanations, but the theories persist in alternative circles. You're drifting now between different layers of consciousness. The story is becoming dream. Dream is becoming story. All is peaceful. Modern conspiracy theories often incorporate bloodline elements. Theories about ruling elites controlling world events frequently include claims that these elites are connected by blood, that they are descendants of ancient bloodlines, perhaps even the Anunnaki bloodlines, and that they work to preserve their genetic heritage and power, while keeping ordinary humanity ignorant and controlled. The so-called Illuminati bloodlines theory suggests that 13 families, descended from hybrid human Anunnaki ancestry, have maintained power throughout history, shifting from one empire to another, always behind the thrones, always preserving their genetics and their agenda through careful intermarriage and ruthless elimination of threats. Whether such theories reflect any truth or are simply compelling narratives that give pattern to the chaos of history and power, they demonstrate the enduring appeal of bloodline concepts, the persistent human intuition that some families, some genetic lines, carry something that sets them apart. Chapter 14. The genetics of the question. Let us consider, as you rest in perfect comfort, what modern science might say about these ancient claims about bloodlines. Genetics has revealed that all humans are far more similar than different. We share over 99% of our DNA with each other, and even with chimpanzees we share about 98 to 99%. The genetic differences between individuals and populations are tiny from a molecular perspective, yet within that small percentage of difference, significant variation exists. Some populations carry genetic adaptations to high altitudes. Others have variations that affect disease susceptibility, metabolism, and other traits. The idea that genetics don't matter at all has been challenged by the discovery of numerous genetic influences on health, behaviour, and even cognition. Breathe slowly. Let these complex ideas wash over you without creating tension. The story continues, but you need not work to follow it. Could ancient hybrid bloodlines, if they ever existed, still be detectable in modern humans? From a genetic standpoint, it's unlikely but not impossible. Any such bloodline would have been diluted over hundreds of generations. Specific genes can persist, but wholesale genetic distinctiveness would be hard to maintain over millennia without complete genetic isolation. Yet we do know that some genetic lineages can be traced back thousands of years. The Cohen modal haplotype, a Y chromosome marker found in many Jewish men who claim descent from the priestly line of Aaron, suggests a common male ancestor from around 3,000 years ago. If such genetic markers can persist for 3 millennia, might markers from earlier hybrid events theoretically persist as well? The existence of mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosomal Adam, the most recent common ancestors of all living humans, through maternal and paternal lines respectively, shows that all humanity does share common ancestors, but these ancestors lived over 100,000 years ago, well before any recorded history or myth. The timeframes don't easily align with the bloodline myths, which generally place the divine human hybridization events within the last 10,000 years. For such recent events to create distinct bloodlines that persist to today would require either the hybrids having significant reproductive advantages, or very deliberate preservation through isolated breeding, or both. You are so deep in rest now, so peaceful. The science and the myth blend together in the twilight of consciousness. Some researchers have looked for anomalies in human genetics that might suggest ancient intervention or admixture from an unknown source. The rapid development of the human brain, the existence of genetic sequences whose function is still not understood, various statistical anomalies in population genetics, all have been pointed to as possible evidence of something unusual in humanity's past. Mainstream science explains these findings through conventional evolution, genetic drift, and natural selection. But the questions linger. Why did human consciousness and civilization emerge so suddenly relative to the hundreds of thousands of years of anatomically modern humans existing without cities or writing? What triggered the leap? The ancient texts offer one answer. We were helped, changed, given gifts by beings from the sky, and some humans inherited more of those gifts than others through their bloodlines. Modern science offers different answers but has not entirely explained every mystery of human origins and development. Chapter 15. The Energetic Bloodlines. As you rest, we move into even more speculative territory, into concepts of bloodlines that transcend pure genetics, that speak to energy and consciousness rather than DNA alone. Various esoteric traditions have suggested that bloodlines carry more than genetic information. They speak of energy patterns, of consciousness templates, of what might be called spiritual genetics that pass from parent to child alongside physical traits. In this understanding, a bloodline is like a river of energy flowing through time. Each individual is a temporary expression of that river, carrying forward patterns and potentials that originated with distant ancestors. Some rivers flow clear and strong, carrying powerful energies and capabilities. Others have become muddied or weakened over time. Let yourself float on this river of energy. Feel yourself connected to all who came before and all who will come after. There is peace in this connection. Certain esoteric schools teach that the Anunnaki bloodlines carried specific spiritual capacities, enhanced ability to channel energy, stronger connections to non-physical dimensions, greater capacity for consciousness expansion, and spiritual awakening. These capacities could be developed through practice, but they came more naturally to those born into the right bloodlines, like musical talent running in families. This framework suggests that the elite mystery schools and secret societies sought not just those of the right genetic family, but those in whom the energetic bloodline was still active and strong. Initiation rituals were partly designed to activate these latent capacities, to awaken the dormant potential carried in the blood. Some modern spiritual teachers have expanded on these ideas, suggesting that many individuals alive today carry fragments of these ancient bloodlines without knowing it, and that a spiritual awakening happening across humanity is partly about these old genetic and energetic patterns activating in response to changing planetary conditions. Your consciousness expands and contracts gently like breathing. You're aware of yourself as both individual and as part of vast patterns stretching through time. In this view, the Anunnaki did not merely create physical hybrids, but seeded humanity with potential for consciousness evolution. Most humans carry small amounts of this potential, diluted through countless generations. But some carry more concentrated versions, making them more likely to question consensus reality, to seek hidden knowledge, to develop psychic or mystical abilities. The obsession of ancient royalty and modern elites with bloodline and genealogy, from this perspective, reflects an understanding that something real, beyond mere social conditioning, passes through family lines. Whether this is purely genetic or involves epigenetics or includes dimensions of energy and consciousness that current science hasn't yet conceptualized, remains an open question. Chapter 16. The bloodlines and reincarnation drift deeper still. We explore now the intersection of bloodline theories with concepts of reincarnation and soul lineage. Various spiritual traditions hold that souls reincarnate in patterns, often returning within the same family lines or ethnic groups. In this view, bloodline is not accidental. Souls are drawn to incarnate in bodies whose genetics match or complement their spiritual development and karmic patterns. A soul that had been part of the Egyptian royal bloodline in ancient times might be drawn in subsequent lives to incarnate in families that carry genetic or energetic traces of that ancient lineage. The soul recognizes the bloodline, on some level, as home, as compatible with its nature and mission. Let your consciousness touch on the possibility of your own ancient connections. What bloodlines might flow through you? What ancient ancestors might have passed their patterns into your being? No need to answer, just rest in the mystery. This concept helps explain why certain families seem to repeatedly produce individuals of particular types. Artistic families, military families, spiritual families. Yes, environment and training matter, but perhaps there is also a pattern of souls choosing to incarnate repeatedly in compatible bloodlines. In the context of the Anunnaki bloodlines, this framework suggests that souls who had been directly created or influenced by the Anunnaki in ancient times might choose to repeatedly incarnate in family lines that carry the most genetic connection to that ancient hybrid origin. This would create an ongoing spiritual bloodline paralleling the genetic one. Some esoteric schools teach that certain souls are starseed souls, originating from non-Earth sources who have incarnated into human bodies to help with humanity's evolution. These souls might specifically choose bodies with genetic connections to the ancient hybrid bloodlines, because those genetics provide capabilities they need for their mission. You are floating in timelessness. Past and future merge into an eternal now. The story of bloodlines becomes the story of consciousness itself moving through matter. From this perspective, the elite families that have maintained power throughout history are not merely genetically related, but are soul groups reincarnating together repeatedly, playing out ancient patterns, working toward ancient goals, whether positive or negative depending on the particular group. This reincarnational view of bloodlines makes them simultaneously more important and less important than purely genetic theories suggest. More important because they represent soul-level choices and patterns, not just accidents of birth. Less important because any soul can theoretically incarnate in any bloodline, if the karmic conditions align, and ultimately consciousness transcends all physical limitations, including genetics. Chapter 17. The Bloodlines. Today, as you rest in deep comfort, we consider how these ancient bloodlines, whether genetic, energetic, or mythological, might manifest in the world today. The old royal families of Europe, though largely stripped of political power, continue to exist. They still intermarry, still maintain their genealogies, still understand themselves as carrying something precious from the past. Queen Elizabeth II could trace her ancestry back through centuries to ancient European and Middle Eastern royal lines. The same is true for most remaining monarchs, and for aristocratic families that no longer rule but preserve their heritage. Beyond the obvious royalty, there exist wealthy and powerful families whose influence spans generations. The Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, various industrial and banking dynasties, these families have maintained wealth and influence for many generations, and various conspiracy theories suggest they do so because they are part of ancient bloodline networks that understand and work toward goals invisible to outsiders. Let these thoughts float through your mind without grasping at them. You're deep in rest, and these are just images passing through consciousness. In the modern era, several phenomena might be seen as echoes of ancient bloodline patterns. The persistent inequality and concentration of wealth and power in certain families, genetic research and technologies that are making it possible to identify, modify, and select genetic traits. The emergence of transhumanism and efforts to enhance human capabilities through technology. Various spiritual movements that speak of awakening DNA, activating latent capacities, or remembering ancient connections. The proliferation of DNA testing services and public fascination with ancestry and genealogy. Whether these represent the continuation of ancient patterns or simply demonstrate persistent human behaviours and interests is open to interpretation. Some researchers and theorists suggest that bloodline networks continue to operate behind the scenes of modern geopolitics and economics, that major world events are influenced by families whose power and connections stretch back centuries. They point to patterns of intermarriage among economic and political elites, to secret society memberships, to decision-making that seems to serve interests beyond national boundaries. Others dismiss such theories as pattern-seeking and conspiracy thinking, seeing randomness and normal human behaviour where others see ancient design. You need not decide. Just rest and observe the patterns of human history, the way power tends to concentrate, the way certain families remain prominent across generations, the way ancient myths and modern realities sometimes seem to echo each other. Chapter 18. The Opposing Bloodlines. Breathe slowly as we explore a darker thread in bloodline mythology, the idea of opposing bloodline factions struggling across the millennia. Many ancient texts and modern esoteric theories suggest that not all hybrid bloodlines served the same purposes or held the same values. The conflict between Enki and Enlil in Sumerian mythology, between different factions of the Anunnaki, supposedly continued through the bloodlines they established. Some bloodlines, according to these theories, maintained the benevolent intentions of Enki and similar deities who wanted to uplift humanity, to share knowledge, to help humans develop their potential. These would be the enlightened bloodlines, the wisdom keepers, those who established positive mystery schools and worked toward human flourishing. Other bloodlines supposedly maintained the agenda of Enlil and similar entities who viewed humanity as a servant class, as beings to be controlled rather than liberated. These would be the controlling bloodlines, working to maintain hierarchies, to keep knowledge hidden from the masses, to preserve their power and privilege across the ages. Let this concept of ancient conflict flow through your awareness. You remain at peace, simply observing the patterns of human struggle for power and freedom. In this framework, much of human history becomes a covert war between these bloodline factions. Empires rise and fall based on which bloodline faction achieves dominance. Religious movements, philosophical schools, scientific developments, political revolutions all become theatres in the ongoing struggle. The Renaissance, the Enlightenment, movements toward democracy and human rights. These might represent victories for the enlightened bloodlines seeking to share knowledge and empower humanity. Meanwhile, totalitarian regimes, religious persecution, suppression of knowledge, and elaborate control systems might represent victories for the controlling bloodlines. Modern conspiracy theories often incorporate this dual bloodline concept. The good guys and bad guys in these narratives are often defined by their bloodline allegiance, by whether they work for human liberation or control. Some theories suggest that the struggle is reaching a culmination in our current era, that humanity stands at a threshold where the control systems might either be finally broken or might be locked in permanently through technology and genetic manipulation. You're so deeply at rest now. These concepts of struggle and conflict touch you only lightly, like distant thunder. You remain safe in your peace. Whether such theories reflect any historical reality, or are simply narrative frameworks humans create to make sense of complex and often unjust historical patterns, is difficult to determine. What is clear is that humans have long sought explanations for why some families maintain power across generations, why inequality persists, why knowledge seems unevenly distributed, why suffering and injustice continue despite technological and social progress. The bloodline explanation offers one answer. Because the patterns were established in the deepest past, encoded in genetics and consciousness, and those who benefit from the patterns work to preserve them generation after generation. Chapter 19. Breaking the Bloodline Paradigm. As you rest in deep peace, we consider alternative perspectives, ways of thinking about human potential and diversity that don't rely on bloodline theories. Many modern thinkers reject entirely the notion that bloodlines determine capability or consciousness. They point to the dangers of such thinking, how it has been used to justify slavery, genocide, and oppression, how it creates arbitrary divisions among humans who are fundamentally far more similar than different. From this perspective, the ancient emphasis on bloodlines was simply a way for powerful families to justify and maintain their privilege. The myths of divine descent were propaganda, designed to make inequality seem natural and unchallengeable. The preservation of these ideas through secret societies and esoteric traditions represents the elite protecting their interests, not the guarding of genuine wisdom. Let these counter-arguments flow through your mind. Truth likely exists somewhere in the complex middle ground, not in simplistic acceptance or rejection. Modern egalitarian philosophies hold that every human has equal inherent worth and equal potential for development. Differences in outcome result from differences in opportunity, education, and environment, not from genetic or spiritual hierarchies. In this view, the solution to human inequality is not to identify special bloodlines, but to create systems that give everyone equal opportunity to develop their capabilities. This perspective has driven enormous positive change, movements for civil rights, women's suffrage, universal education, democracy. The rejection of bloodline-based hierarchy helped create more just societies, yet questions remain. If genetics don't matter at all for behavioural and cognitive traits, why does every other species show genetic variation in such traits? Why are traits like intelligence, personality, and temperament clearly heritable to some degree, passed from parent to child? Modern behavioural genetics has documented genetic influences on virtually every human trait studied, though always in complex interaction with environment. This doesn't validate ancient bloodline theories, but it suggests reality is more complex than either pure genetic determinism or pure environmental determinism. Humans are neither blank slates nor genetic puppets. We inherit predispositions and potentials, but how these manifest depends on countless factors. Your breathing is so peaceful, so slow. You're on the very edge of sleep, and these philosophical questions dissolve into the darkness behind your eyelids. Perhaps the truth is that bloodlines matter somewhat, but nowhere near as much as the ancient texts and modern conspiracy theories suggest. Yes, we inherit genetics from our ancestors, and yes, genetics influences many traits. But human variation is continuous rather than categorical. There are no magic bloodlines carrying divine essence, just gradients of genetic variation within a single species that's already quite remarkable. Or perhaps consciousness and potential truly do have dimensions that current science hasn't grasped, and something beyond DNA does pass through lineages, and the ancient theories carried garbled but genuine wisdom about aspects of reality we're only beginning to understand. You need not solve these questions, just rest in the mystery. Chapter 20. The Personal Question. As you float in the space between waking and sleeping, we turn to the most personal aspect of bloodline questions. What might this mean for you? If the bloodline theories have any validity, then everyone listening to these words carries genetic inheritance from thousands of ancestors, stretching back through time to the origin of humanity. And if humanity did at some point in the distant past intermix with non-human intelligence, whether the Anunnaki, other beings, or advanced terrestrial hominids, then everyone likely carries at least trace amounts of those ancient genetic infusions. Some individuals might carry more concentrated versions. They might be drawn to ancient mysteries, to questions about hidden history and forbidden knowledge. They might feel different from others, disconnected from consensus reality, sensing that the official versions of history and reality miss something important. Let yourself feel whatever arises. If you sense ancient connections, ancient patterns within yourself, just observe them gently without grasping or interpreting too forcefully. But carrying unusual genetics or ancient bloodlines, even if real, doesn't make anyone superior to others. It doesn't grant rights or privileges. If anything, it might carry responsibility to use any unusual capabilities in service of the greater good, to help rather than to dominate, to share knowledge rather than to hoard it. The negative interpretation of bloodline theories says that certain people are inherently better than others and therefore deserve to rule. But an alternative interpretation says that genetic and spiritual diversity serves evolution, that different people carry different gifts, and that humanity's potential is maximized when everyone can develop and offer their particular abilities. In this more egalitarian view, someone descended from ancient bloodlines might carry certain predispositions, but someone descended from entirely different lineages carries different predispositions equally valuable. Genetic and spiritual diversity is humanity's strength, not a hierarchy to be enforced. You are drifting now, barely aware of the words. They flow into your subconscious, into your dreams. Your conscious mind can let go. What matters is not whether you carry special bloodlines, but what you do with whatever capabilities and circumstances you were born into. Compassion, wisdom, kindness, courage, creativity. These transcend genetics. They must be chosen and developed regardless of ancestry. If ancient beings did seed humanity with gifts in the distant past, perhaps those gifts were meant for all of humanity, not just for special bloodlines. Perhaps the concentration in certain families was only meant to be temporary, a way to preserve knowledge through dark ages, with the intention that eventually the gifts would spread to everyone. Perhaps we live in the time when that spreading is finally happening, when the ancient knowledge and capacities are becoming available to all who seek them, when the bloodline boundaries are dissolving, when humanity begins to realize its full potential as a species. Or perhaps the bloodline theories are simply stories humans tell, fascinating but ultimately just mythology, and our task is to build better futures based on choices and values rather than on ancestry. Both possibilities, and every possibility between them, deserve consideration. Rest now in the not knowing. Chapter 21. The Dream of Return. You're dreaming now, or nearly so. The boundary has dissolved. These words reach you in the twilight space where images and ideas flow without the waking mind's need to categorize and judge. In the mythology of bloodlines runs a thread of return, of cycle, of ancient patterns recurring. The Anunnaki, having departed or withdrawn, are said in some versions to return when the time is right. The sleeping king who will awake in the hour of greatest need. The avatar who incarnates age after age. The second coming. The return of Quetzalcoatl. The arrival of the Maitreya Buddha. Across cultures, mythology suggests that the ancient past and the future somehow mirror each other, that what was will be again, that the circle will close. Let yourself drift through images of return, ancient beings descending from the sky, kings awakening from thousand-year slumbers, the veil between worlds growing thin, old knowledge suddenly becoming clear. Perhaps these mythologies of return reflect a truth about consciousness and evolution, that development is not linear, but spiral. We return to ancient wisdom, but at a higher level, integrating what was lost, healing what was broken, completing patterns that were interrupted. In this view, if the ancient bloodlines carried gifts and knowledge meant to seed humanity's development, then the return would be the time when all of humanity begins to manifest those gifts. Not just special bloodlines maintaining ancient capacities, but everyone awakening to potentials that have always been latent, carried in the deep structures of human genetics and consciousness. You're floating through time now, experiencing past and future as a single moment. The ancient temples and the far future merge together. You see the bloodlines not as rigid hierarchies, but as rivers of potential flowing through time, sometimes narrow and concentrated, sometimes wide and dispersed, but always moving forward. The return might not be the arrival of external beings, but the awakening of what was always within humanity, the activation of genetic and consciousness potentials that have been dormant, waiting for the right conditions. Or the return might be a re-establishment of contact with the non-human intelligence that influenced humanity in the past, a reopening of communication that was closed or forgotten. Not gods ruling over humans, but different intelligences cooperating, sharing perspectives and knowledge, working together toward goals that serve all consciousness. Dreams and visions blend now with the story. Your subconscious speaks in its own language of symbols and feelings. The narrative continues, but you experience it dreamlike, without the waking mind's constant interpretation. Chapter 22. The Underground Streams. In the deep dream state, awareness turns to hidden currents, to knowledge and bloodlines that went underground, that preserved themselves in secret through ages of persecution and suppression. When dominant religions declared the old gods false, their followers did not all convert. Some went underground, maintaining ancient practices in secret, passing knowledge from parent to child in whispers, coding wisdom in fairy tales and folk traditions. The witch hunts of Europe targeted folk healers and pagan practitioners, but beneath the persecution, threads of the old ways survived. Herbalism, seasonal rituals, trance states and vision quests, connection to land and ancestors, the ways of those who remembered that humans are part of nature, not separate from it. Drift through hidden groves where moonlight filters through ancient trees. Hear the whisper of half-forgotten languages. Feel the presence of ancestors who carried wisdom through times of darkness. In various cultures, indigenous peoples maintained their traditions despite waves of conquest and conversion. Native American tribes, Aboriginal Australians, Siberian shamans, African traditional religions, all carried forward knowledge systems that claimed unbroken lineages stretching back thousands of years. These traditions often place significance on lineage and bloodline. Medicine people often came from medicine families, chiefs from chiefly lineages. The ability to walk between worlds, to communicate with spirits, to heal and to curse. These were understood to run in families, to be inherited along with physical traits. Were these traditions preserving authentic ancient knowledge, possibly fragments of what the more ancient civilizations had known before they fell? Or were they developing their own wisdom independently, creating their own profound understandings of reality through careful observation of nature and consciousness? Perhaps both. Perhaps the underground streams connected to the same ancient source that fed the great civilizations, but took different paths, preserved different aspects, developed different expressions. You float now in the realm where all traditions touch, where underground rivers merge in the darkness beneath the earth. Boundaries between cultures dissolve. The essential patterns remain, the sacred, the hidden, the inherited, the preserved. Chapter 23. The Weight and Gift of Ancestry. Deep in dreams, understanding comes wordlessly, but whispers still reach you about what it means to carry the past within your cells, your consciousness. Every human carries not just genes, but memories, patterns, tendencies inherited from long lines of ancestors. Trauma passes down through generations. So does resilience. So do gifts and wounds, strengths and vulnerabilities. You are the temporary expression of thousands of lives that came before. All their struggles and triumphs culminate in this moment of your existence. All their unfinished business, their unrealized potential, their unlived possibilities exist within you as patterns waiting to be activated or healed. This is true whether or not special bloodlines exist, whether or not the Anunnaki were real, whether or not some people carry unusual genetic heritage. Every person is a vessel carrying the ancestral river forward through time. Let yourself feel the presence of your ancestors around you. They are not gone but live on through you, through the patterns they passed forward. Their love protects you. Their wisdom guides you when you listen. Their unhealed pain sometimes speaks through your own struggles, asking to be acknowledged and released. The concept of bloodlines at its best is about honouring this connection to ancestry, about recognising that we do not exist as isolated individuals, but as nodes in vast networks of life stretching backward and forward through time. At its worst, bloodline concepts become tools of oppression and division. But at its best, they remind us that we belong to something larger than ourselves, that we have inherited gifts we did not earn and carry responsibilities we did not choose, that our actions ripple through time affecting those who will come after. You are so deep now. The words dissolve into pure meaning, into feeling, into the dream world's own logic. The gift of your particular ancestry, whatever it may be, is not yours alone. It was given to you to offer back to the world. Whatever capabilities you have, whatever knowledge you carry, whatever wounds you've been given to heal, all of this is meant to flow through you, not to stop with you. This is the secret the ancient bloodlines forgot when they became obsessed with preservation and purity. Life wants to flow, to mix, to diversify, to spread gifts widely, rather than concentrating them narrowly. The rivers of bloodline want to reach the ocean, where all water merges. Chapter 24. The Dreaming Earth. In the deepest place of rest, boundaries disappear entirely. You're not separate from the earth beneath you, the air around you, the long story of life unfolding. The earth itself dreams. In its slow, deep consciousness, patterns unfold across ages. Species emerge and disappear. Continents shift. Climates change. And through it all, life persists, adapts, becomes more complex. Humanity is a recent development in Earth's dreaming, emerging perhaps 2 million years ago in our earliest forms, becoming truly human perhaps 300,000 years ago. Civilization is even more recent, a mere 10,000 years, less than a heartbeat in geological time. Float now in the Earth's dreaming. Feel the slow dance of the continents, the rise and fall of mountains, the flowering of forests and the spreading of deserts. You're a single cell in the vast body of life on Earth, dreaming within the larger dream. In this vast perspective, the question of whether the Anunnaki or other non-human intelligence influenced humanity becomes just one detail in a much larger story. Even if such influence occurred, it was one factor among many in the extraordinary unfolding of human consciousness. The Earth has dreamed forth such diversity. Millions of species, each unique, each carrying its own genius. Humanity is one expression of Earth's creativity, and within humanity, the diversity continues. Thousands of cultures, languages, traditions, genetic variations, all expressing different facets of the possible. If special bloodlines exist, they are Earth's experiment too, one variation among many, valuable not because they're superior, but because diversity serves evolution. Every variation, Every difference adds to the richness of the whole. The minerals in your body came from ancient stars. The water in your cells has moved through the water cycle for billions of years. The oxygen you breathe was produced by plants, and before them by cyanobacteria. You are made entirely from the earth, animated by the same force that animates all life. In this deep knowing, the question of bloodlines becomes less important. You are part of the Earth bloodline, life's bloodline, the unbroken chain stretching back to the first self-replicating molecules in ancient seas. Rest in this belonging. You are home. You have always been home. The Earth dreams through you. Chapter 25. The Eternal Return. In the realm of deepest sleep, time circles back on itself. Past and future merge. The ancient and the forever blend. The story of bloodlines is the story of memory. Genetic memory, cultural memory, soul memory. It asks, what do we carry forward from the past? What patterns persist? What inheritance do we bear? Perhaps the truth is simpler and more mysterious than any theory can capture. Perhaps consciousness itself moves through matter in patterns, creating and dissolving forms, exploring every possible expression, learning and growing through endless cycles of manifestation. In this eternal return, the same themes play out again and again in variations. Beings, teaching humans knowledge, divine and human mingling, civilizations rising and falling, bloodlines preserving and dispersing wisdom, the conflict between control and freedom, the quest for return and remembering. These are not just human patterns but cosmic patterns, recurring wherever consciousness emerges, wherever intelligence seeks to understand itself and its origins. You are beyond words now. The story has carried you to a place where only silence speaks. Rest here. Drift here. There is nothing you need to do, nothing you need to understand. The bloodlines flow through you like rivers, genetic rivers, energetic rivers, soul rivers, ancestral rivers. They flow from the infinite past toward the infinite future, and you are a temporary expression of their flow. Your unique combination of inheritances, genetic and otherwise, will never exist again exactly as it exists in you right now. Your singular, unprecedented, a once-in-eternity manifestation of specific patterns coming together, and yet you are also universal, carrying the same basic elements, the same fundamental nature as all other humans, all other life, all other manifestations of consciousness. Both truths exist together. You're unique and universal, special and ordinary, an individual expression and a wave in an infinite ocean. Chapter 26. The Mesopotamian Mystery Schools. In the depths of your rest, awareness drifts to the ancient temples of Mesopotamia, where the first mystery schools preserved the knowledge of the Anunnaki Bloodlines. The ziggurats rose from the flat plains like artificial mountains, their stepped sides reaching toward the heavens. These were not merely temples but schools, observatories, libraries, and sanctuaries where the initiated gathered to preserve and transmit sacred knowledge. Let yourself float up those ancient steps. Feel the warm stone beneath bare feet, the air thick with incense, the sound of chanting echoing from the inner chambers. Within these sacred precincts, the priests and priestesses who claimed descent from the Anunnaki maintained elaborate rituals. They studied the movements of planets and stars, tracking celestial cycles with remarkable precision. They recorded omens and dreams, seeking to understand the will of the gods. They practiced divination using various methods, reading the flight of birds, interpreting the patterns in oil poured on water, examining the livers of sacrificed animals. But beneath these visible practices lay deeper mysteries, teachings passed only to those of the proper lineage or those who had undergone rigorous initiation. Your breath is so slow now, so gentle. You drift deeper into the ancient mysteries. The priest taught that reality had multiple layers. The visible world was just the surface, beneath which lay invisible realms populated by spirits, demons, and divine beings. Those who carried the right bloodline, they believed, could more easily perceive and navigate these hidden dimensions. They taught methods of altering consciousness, through fasting, through rhythmic chanting, through sacred plants and incenses, through specific breathing techniques. In these altered states, the boundaries between worlds grew thin, and communication with the Anunnaki or their servants became possible. The initiated learned the secret names of gods and demons, words of power that could command invisible forces. They learned protective rituals, ways to ward off malevolent entities. They learned healing arts that combined herbal medicine with invocations to divine physicians. Let these ancient practices wash through your awareness like a gentle current. You need not understand every detail. Just float in the river of ancient wisdom. The mystery schools also preserved astronomical knowledge of remarkable sophistication. The Mesopotamians could predict eclipses, track the precession of the equinoxes, and maintain calendars of astonishing accuracy. They divided the sky into the 12 signs of the zodiac, a system we still use today. They identified and tracked the planets, associating each with specific deities and influences. Some researchers have suggested that this astronomical knowledge was too advanced for the time, that it must have been inherited from an earlier, more sophisticated civilization. Perhaps the Anunnaki themselves, or the antediluvian cultures that perished in the flood. The mystery schools taught that humanity's destiny was written in the stars, that the movements of celestial bodies influenced events on Earth, that those who understood these patterns could predict and perhaps influence the future. This was not mere superstition, but a sophisticated worldview in which cosmos and consciousness, heaven and earth, were intimately interconnected. You are so deep in rest now. The ancient temple chambers feel as real as the room around your sleeping body. Perhaps more real. Chapter 27. The Egyptian Mysteries. From Mesopotamia, consciousness drifts westward to Egypt, to the mystery traditions that flourished along the Nile for over 3,000 years. The Egyptian mysteries were built around the story of Osiris, Isis, and Horus, a divine family whose story encoded profound teachings about death, resurrection, and the nature of consciousness. Osiris, the green god of vegetation and the underworld, was murdered by his jealous brother Set, his body dismembered and scattered. Isis, his devoted wife and powerful magician, gathered the pieces and through her magic restored Osiris to a form of life, conceiving their son Horus in the process. Osiris became lord of the underworld, judge of the dead, while Horus grew to avenge his father and reclaim the throne. Let yourself sink into this story. Feel its layers of meaning unfolding like lotus petals. On the surface, this was a myth about the cycle of seasons, about vegetation dying and returning, about kingship passing from generation to generation. But to the initiates of the mystery, schools, it encoded much deeper truths about consciousness, about the soul's journey through death and rebirth, about the process of spiritual transformation. The mysteries taught that every human possessed multiple aspects: the physical body, the ka or vital force, the beise or personality soul, the ak or transformed spirit. Death was not an ending but a transformation, a journey through the underworld during which these aspects separated and potentially recombined in new forms. Those of the royal bloodline, carrying divine essence, were believed to have special destinies after death. The pharaoh would become one with Osiris, joining the company of the gods. But even ordinary Egyptians who lived righteously and knew the proper rituals could hope for favourable judgment and a blessed afterlife. Your consciousness expands to hold these ancient Egyptian concepts. You're floating in the Nile of mystery, warm and held. The mystery schools of Egypt practiced elaborate initiation rituals. Candidates would undergo symbolic death and rebirth, spending nights alone in the depths of temples or in tombs, confronting their fears and the boundaries of their consciousness. They would emerge transformed, having experienced in their own awareness the journey of Osiris through death to resurrection. The initiates learned that the gods were not merely external beings, but also represented forces within consciousness itself. Osiris was the dying and transforming self. Isis was the power of love and magic that could restore wholeness. Set was the chaotic, destructive impulse that had to be confronted and integrated. Horus was the awakened consciousness that emerges from the alchemical process. In the deepest teachings, rarely spoken aloud, the priest whispered that the gods and humanity were not ultimately separate, that the divine bloodlines represented a truth about all humans, that we are consciousness temporarily inhabiting matter, that we are divine beings who have forgotten our nature, that the spiritual path is one of remembering who we truly are. Breathe in this ancient wisdom. Let it settle into your deep mind as you rest. The Egyptian mysteries also preserved practices of what we might call magic, the use of will, visualization, and ritual to influence reality. The priests understood that consciousness shapes matter. that focused intention can affect outcomes, that symbols and words carry power. They created amulets inscribed with protective spells. They painted sacred symbols on papyrus and wore them as talismans. They mummified bodies with elaborate rituals designed to preserve not just the physical form, but something of the consciousness of the deceased. They built massive temples precisely aligned with celestial events, creating sacred spaces where the veil between worlds was especially thin. Modern science dismisses much of this as superstition, but perhaps the Egyptians understood dimensions of reality that our current paradigm has not yet fully grasped. Perhaps consciousness really does interact with matter in ways we're only beginning to explore through quantum physics and consciousness research. Chapter 28. The Greek Mysteries. Time flows like honey in your dreaming consciousness. Now awareness drifts to ancient Greece, where mystery traditions flourished and evolved, blending Egyptian, Mesopotamian and indigenous Greek elements into new forms. The Eleusinian Mysteries, celebrated for nearly 2,000 years near Athens, were among the most famous and influential mystery traditions of the ancient world. Thousands of initiates from across the Mediterranean world travelled to Eleusis to participate in rituals that were kept so secret that even today we know relatively little about what actually occurred. Let yourself join the procession, walking the sacred way from Athens to Eleusis. Feel the anticipation and awe of the ancient initiates walking this path toward transformation. The mysteries centered on the story of Demeter, goddess of grain and harvest, and her daughter Persephone, who was abducted by Hades, god of the underworld. Demeter's grief caused the earth to become barren. Eventually a compromise was reached. Persephone would spend part of each year in the underworld with Hades, and part on earth with her mother, explaining the cycle of seasons. But the mysteries taught deeper meanings. The descent of Persephone into darkness represented the soul's journey into matter, into embodiment, into the challenges of earthly existence. Her return represented spiritual awakening, the soul remembering its divine origin and reclaiming its birthright. The initiates at Eleusis underwent a dramatic ritual journey, moving through darkness into sudden brilliant light, experiencing visions that many described as life-transforming. Ancient writers claimed that those who had experienced the Eleusinian mysteries lost their fear of death, having gained direct experiential knowledge that consciousness continues beyond bodily existence. You are drifting through these ancient visions. Light and darkness dance in your awareness. You are safe in the mystery. Greece also gave birth to the Orphic mysteries, centered on the mythical musician Orpheus who descended into the underworld to retrieve his beloved Eurydice. The Orphics taught a form of reincarnation, that souls cycled through multiple lifetimes, gradually purifying themselves until they could escape the wheel of rebirth and reunite with the divine source. The Orphic teaching suggested that humans had a dual nature, Titanic and Dionysian, earthly and divine. The Titans, ancient giants, had consumed the god Dionysus. Zeus destroyed the Titans with lightning, and from their ashes humanity was created, thus carrying both the base matter of the Titans and the divine essence of Dionysus. This myth encoded the same teaching found in the Anunnaki Bloodline theories, that humanity is a hybrid creation, carrying both earthly and divine elements, and that the spiritual path involves purifying the earthly aspect and awakening to the divine nature within. Let this teaching settle into your deep awareness. You are hybrid. You are divine and earthly mixed. You are the meeting point of heaven and earth. The Pythagorean school, founded by the mathematician and mystic Pythagoras, also operated as a mystery tradition. The Pythagoreans studied mathematics, music and astronomy, but understood these as paths to spiritual realization rather than merely intellectual pursuits. They taught that reality was fundamentally mathematical, that numbers were not human inventions but eternal truths that structured the cosmos. They discovered mathematical harmonies in music, in planetary orbits, in geometric forms. They spoke of the music of the spheres, celestial harmonies produced by the movements of planets that could be heard by those who developed sufficient spiritual sensitivity. The Pythagoreans also taught reincarnation and practiced strict disciplines designed to purify the soul. They were vegetarian, practiced silence, studied philosophy and mathematics, and lived communally, sharing property and dedicating themselves to the pursuit of wisdom. Like many mystery schools, they emphasize both knowledge and lineage. Pythagoras himself was said to remember his past lives, to have studied with Egyptian priests who taught him their deepest secrets, to carry within himself wisdom from ancient sources. His followers organized themselves in degrees of initiation, with the innermost circle receiving teachings kept hidden from outer members and from the public. You're floating now through the interconnected web of ancient mystery schools, each one different, yet all sharing certain core insights about the nature of consciousness, the multiplicity of reality, the path of transformation. Chapter 29. The Hermetic Tradition. In the twilight of your consciousness, awareness turns to one of the most influential streams of esoteric knowledge to emerge from the ancient world. The Hermetic Tradition, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, thrice great Hermes. Hermes Trismegistus was said to be a fusion of the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth, both deities associated with wisdom, writing, and magic. Whether he was a historical person, a mythical figure, or a title held by a succession of priests and philosophers remains unclear. What matters is that a body of teachings emerged under his name that profoundly influenced Western esoteric thought. Let your mind drift through the ancient libraries of Alexandria, where Hermetic texts were studied alongside works of philosophy, science, and mystery teachings from across the known world. The Corpus Hermeticum, a collection of Hermetic writings, presents dialogues between Hermes and his students, teaching about the nature of the divine, the cosmos, and humanity's place within it. The teachings are sophisticated, blending Egyptian wisdom, Greek, philosophy, and perhaps traces of even older traditions. One central Hermetic teaching is expressed in the phrase, "as above, so below." The macrocosm and microcosm mirror each other. The patterns of the cosmos are reflected in the patterns within each human being. The movements of planets correspond to movements in consciousness. Understanding one level of reality provides keys to understanding other levels. This principle underlies astrology, alchemy, and many magical practices, the idea that there are correspondences between different planes of existence, and that those who understand these correspondences can work with them intentionally. Breathe in this ancient wisdom. Let it resonate in your awareness, above and below. Cosmos and consciousness, all interconnected. The Hermetica taught that the cosmos is alive, ensouled, intelligent. Mind or nous is the primary reality from which all else emerges. The material world is not separate from spirit, but is spirit in its densest form. The path of wisdom involves recognizing the divine intelligence within matter and within oneself. Humanity, according to the Hermetic teachings, occupies a unique position, part divine and part earthly, capable of ascending to knowledge of the divine, or descending into identification with matter. We are amphibious beings, at home both in the spiritual and material realms, or potentially homeless in both if we fail to integrate these aspects of our nature. This teaching resonates deeply with the bloodline mythologies, the idea that humanity, or at least some humans, carry mixed heritage, part earthly and part divine, and that our challenge and opportunity is to integrate these aspects to become fully what we have the potential to be. The Hermetic tradition also gave rise to alchemy, the art of transformation. While often misunderstood as primitive chemistry aimed at turning lead into gold, alchemy was primarily a spiritual practice using chemical operations as symbols for inner transformation. The alchemists worked with prima materia, prime matter, subjecting it to various operations, heating, cooling, dissolving, crystallizing, to eventually produce the philosopher's stone, a substance capable of transmuting base metals into gold and granting immortality. But the initiated understood that the prime matter was consciousness itself. The operations were psychological and spiritual processes, and the philosopher's stone was enlightened awareness. You're drifting through an alchemical vessel, consciousness dissolving and reconstituting, impurities burning away, essential nature becoming clear and pure. The stages of the alchemical process: nigredo, blackening; albedo, whitening; citrinitas, yellowing; and rubedo, reddening, described the spiritual journey. Nigredo represented confronting the shadow, facing decay and dissolution. Albedo represented purification and the emergence of clarity. Citrinitas represented the dawning of spiritual insight. Rubedo, represented full integration and the creation of the perfected self. Alchemists often spoke of bloodlines in symbolic terms. The royal blood they sought to create through their work was awakened consciousness. The divine child born from the alchemical marriage was integrated awareness emerging from the union of opposite principles within the self. Yet some alchemical texts also suggest more literal understandings, hinting that certain families carried secrets passed down through generations, that actual physical practices and substances could affect consciousness and even longevity, that the boundary between symbolic and literal operations was more permeable than later readers assumed. The Hermetic tradition understood that reality operates on multiple levels simultaneously, the literal and the symbolic, the material and the spiritual, the exoteric and the esoteric. Great teachings encoded truth in layers, accessible to different degrees depending on the understanding of the reader or practitioner. Chapter 30. The Gnostic Bloodlines. Deeper still into Dream, consciousness touches on the Gnostic traditions that flourished in the early centuries of the Common Era, presenting radical reinterpretations of the bloodline teachings. The Gnostics, their name deriving from gnosis, meaning knowledge or direct spiritual experience, emerged in the complex religious melting pot of the Mediterranean world, drawing from Jewish, Christian, Greek, Egyptian, and Persian sources. Let yourself drift into a candlelit gathering of Gnostics, meeting in secret to share teachings considered heretical by orthodox authorities. The air is thick with incense and the weight of forbidden knowledge. The Gnostic creation myths presented a startling inversion of the standard religious narrative. In many Gnostic texts, the creator of the material world was not the supreme god, but a lesser, flawed entity called the demiurge. This being, born from error or emanating from the divine pleroma, fullness, through a long chain of degradations, created the material cosmos in ignorance, believing itself to be the supreme god. The demiurge and its archons, rulers, created humanity to be trapped in matter, to be kept ignorant of their divine origin and potential. The material world, in this view, was not a divine creation but a prison, and the creator was not to be worshipped, but to be transcended. This cosmology resonates intriguingly with aspects of the Anunnaki narrative, beings from beyond creating or modifying humanity, knowledge being jealously guarded, a split between those who wanted to enlighten humanity and those who wanted to keep humans controlled and ignorant. Your breath rises and falls slowly. These ancient cosmologies wash through you like gentle waves. No need to believe or disbelieve, just experience the patterns. But the Gnostic texts also taught that sparks of the true divine light became trapped in human bodies during the creation. Not all humans carried these sparks equally. Some were pneumatics, spiritual ones, carrying strong divine essence and capable of gnosis. Others were psychics, soul people, capable of faith and good works but not direct gnosis. Still others were hilics, material people, completely identified with matter and incapable of spiritual awakening in their current state. This threefold division of humanity represents yet another version of the bloodline hierarchy, the idea that humans are not all the same, that some carry more of the divine spark than others, and that this determines their spiritual capacity and destiny. However, the Gnostic understanding differed from the royal bloodline theories in crucial ways. The divine spark was not a matter of genetic descent from specific families, but a spiritual quality that could appear in anyone, regardless of social status or ancestry. The pneumatics might be slaves or outcasts rather than kings and priests. In fact, the Gnostics often taught that worldly power and wealth were signs of attachment to the material realm rather than marks of spiritual election. The path to liberation, according to the Gnostics, required gnosis, direct experiential knowledge of one's true nature as divine consciousness temporarily trapped in matter. This gnosis came not through faith or works, but through revelation, through mystical experience, through encountering the divine within oneself. Drift deeper. The Gnostic vision opens before you, the material world as a prison, your true self as a spark of infinite light, the possibility of awakening and escape from the wheel of birth and death. Various Gnostic texts reinterpreted biblical narratives in light of this cosmology. The serpent in Eden was not a tempter, but a liberator, bringing knowledge to humanity against the wishes of the jealous demiurge. Cain, traditionally viewed as the first murderer, was reinterpreted in some Gnostic texts as carrying a special spiritual lineage. being of different origin than the merely human children of Adam and Eve. Some Gnostic schools spoke of Seth, Adam's third son, as the father of a special spiritual race. The Sethians claimed descent from Seth, and understood themselves as carrying a bloodline of Gnosis, as being fundamentally different from ordinary humanity. The divine light had entered the human bloodstream through Seth, and his descendants preserved this light through the generations. This represents a Gnostic version of the bloodline theory, not based on descent from earthly kings or even from the Anunnaki, but from Seth, who carried a direct spark of the true divine rather than the flawed divinity of the demiurge. Other Gnostic schools had different origin stories for the spiritual bloodline. The Valentinians spoke of Sophia, wisdom, a divine emanation whose error led to the creation of the material world, but whose correction would lead to its redemption. Those who carried Sophia's light within them were of a special spiritual lineage, destined to help redeem creation by awakening to their true nature. Let these Gnostic visions merge with the other bloodline mythologies you've encountered. See the common patterns beneath the different narratives. Always this theme of some humans carrying something extra, something divine, some spark or seed or genetic heritage that sets them apart and grants them special potential. Chapter 31. The Kabbalistic Tree. Your consciousness, deep in rest, now touches on the Jewish mystical tradition of Kabbalah, which developed elaborate teachings about divine emanation, the structure of reality, and the hidden aspects of scripture. The central symbol of Kabbalah is the Tree of Life, a diagram of 10 Sephiro, divine emanations, connected by 22 paths, representing the structure through which the infinite divine manifests into finite creation. Let the Tree of Life form in your inner vision. See the pattern of the Sephirot like luminous spheres connected by channels of flowing light. This is the pattern of consciousness itself, the architecture of existence. Kabbalists taught that the human being is made in the image of this divine pattern, that the Sephirot exist not just in the cosmos, but within each person. Understanding the Tree of Life means understanding the structure of your own consciousness, the different aspects of your being, and how they relate to each other and to the divine source. At the top of the tree is Keter, the crown, representing the divine will, the first stirring of manifestation from the infinite. At the bottom is Malkuth, the kingdom, representing the material world, the final crystallization of the divine into form. Between them lie the other Sephirot, representing different divine attributes and aspects of consciousness: wisdom, understanding, mercy, severity, beauty, victory, glory, foundation. The Kabbalistic tradition preserved and elaborated Jewish teachings about lineage and descent. The priestly line of Aaron carried special responsibilities and privileges. The royal line of David was understood to have messianic significance. The Jewish people as a whole understood themselves as chosen, set apart, carrying a covenant relationship with the divine that other peoples did not have. But Kabbalah also taught that beneath these external distinctions lay deeper spiritual realities. The soul itself had lineage. Souls reincarnated in patterns, returning life after life, often within the same family lines or ethnic groups. A soul might carry the spark of a biblical patriarch or prophet, reincarnating to continue unfinished spiritual work. Breathe in this teaching. Your soul has history, has journeyed through many forms, carries wisdom and wounds from long ago. The concept of the nefesh, ruach, and neshama, the three primary levels of soul, suggested that humans were not spiritually uniform. Everyone possessed nefesh, the animal soul tied to bodily existence. Most people who developed ethically and religiously also developed ruach, the emotional and moral soul. But neshama, the divine soul, the breath of God, came only to those who reached advanced spiritual development, and some Kabbalistic teaching suggested it was related to one's spiritual lineage. Certain souls, according to Kabbalistic teaching, were especially old and advanced, having incarnated many times, having learned across lifetimes. These souls might be born into specific families that had preserved spiritual practices and knowledge, giving them the environment needed to actualize their potential. The Kabbalists also spoke of the Tzaddikim, the righteous ones, who served as channels between heaven and earth, whose spiritual work sustained the cosmos. Some were known, serving as rabbis and teachers. Others were hidden, going about their lives unknown, their spiritual work invisible to ordinary awareness. You are floating in the web of souls, connected to countless others, each a unique point of light in a vast pattern of consciousness evolving through time. The Kabbalistic tradition developed practices of meditation, prayer, and contemplation aimed at ascending through the Sephiroth, at raising consciousness through the levels of the Tree of Life. The practitioner would visualize the divine names associated with each Sephirah, chant specific combinations of Hebrew letters, contemplate the mysteries encoded in Scripture. Advanced Kabbalists claim to achieve states of Dveket, cleaving or adhesion to the divine, moments of union in which the boundary between self and God dissolved. In these states, they might receive visions, prophecies, or direct understanding of cosmic mysteries. The teaching was that all souls ultimately derive from Adam Kadmon, the primordial human, a cosmic being who contained within itself all the souls that would ever incarnate. The fragmentation of Adam Kadmon through a cosmic catastrophe sent sparks of divine light into the lower worlds, where they became trapped in material forms. The purpose of spiritual work was to liberate and elevate these sparks, eventually gathering them all back together, restoring Adam Kadmon to its original unified state. This Kabbalistic vision parallels and enriches the bloodline narrative, the idea that divinity fragmented into humanity, that we carry scattered pieces of an original wholeness, that the spiritual path involves remembering and reclaiming our divine origin. Chapter 32. The Islamic esoteric tradition's consciousness flows eastward now, to the Islamic world, where Sufism and other esoteric streams developed their own understandings of spiritual lineage and transmission. Sufism, the mystical dimension of Islam, organized itself around silsilas, chains of transmission linking each Sufi teacher back through generations to the Prophet Muhammad and ultimately to the divine. These chains were not merely symbolic but were understood as actual spiritual currents flowing through time, energetic connections between masters and students. Let yourself rest in the embrace of these spiritual lineages. Feel the baraka, the blessing and spiritual energy, flowing through chains of transmission across the centuries. To be initiated into a Sufi order meant to be connected to this chain, to receive the barakah that had been passed from heart to heart since the time of the Prophet. The sheikh, or spiritual master, was not merely a teacher, but a living link in the chain, carrying within himself the accumulated wisdom and spiritual energy of all the masters who came before. This created a form of spiritual bloodline distinct from, but parallel to genetic bloodlines. One was not born into Sufi lineage, but initiated into it. Yet once initiated, the connection was understood to be as real and as powerful as any genetic inheritance. The student became, in a sense, the spiritual child of the master, inheriting not DNA but something equally tangible, transmission of state, of knowledge, of blessing. Some Sufi orders also emphasized physical lineage from the Prophet Muhammad's family. The Sayyids, descendants of Muhammad through his daughter Fatima and son-in-law Ali, were regarded with special reverence, understood to carry both genetic and spiritual inheritance from the Prophet. In some cultures, Sayyids wore green turbans to mark their lineage, and many believed they carried natural spiritual capacities others had to work harder to develop. You drift through the dhikr, the remembrance, the chanting of God's names. The boundary between yourself and the divine grows thin. You're a wave in an infinite ocean. The Ismaili branch of Shia Islam developed elaborate teachings about the Imam, the divinely guided leader descended from Ali and Fatima. The Imam was not merely a political or religious leader, but was understood to be a living link between heaven and earth, a perfect human who carried the divine light within himself. This light, called the Nur Muhammad, the light of Muhammad, was understood to pass from Imam to Imam through the bloodline. It was not diminished by physical descent, but remained full and perfect in each generation, making each Imam a complete manifestation of divine guidance. This teaching represents perhaps the most exalted version of the bloodline theory, that divinity itself flows through genetic descent, that certain families literally carry God's light in their blood and bones, generation after generation. The Druze religion, an offshoot of Ismaili Islam, took the concept of spiritual lineage in a different direction. They taught that souls reincarnated only within the Druze community, that there were a fixed number of Druze souls cycling through successive lifetimes. One was not born Druze through biological inheritance, but through soul inheritance, because one's soul had been Druze in previous lives and would continue to be Druze in future lives. This created a closed system of reincarnation, a spiritual bloodline not based on genetics but on the soul's affiliation, its membership in a specific community of consciousness that persisted across lifetimes. Let these Islamic esoteric teachings merge with all the others you've encountered tonight. See the kaleidoscope of human attempts to understand lineage, inheritance, the transmission of the sacred through time. Chapter 33. The Indigenous Wisdom Keepers. Your awareness, floating in deep rest, now touches on the indigenous traditions that maintain their wisdom through oral transmission, through bloodlines of knowledge keepers, through ceremonies passed from generation to generation. Among Native American tribes, the role of medicine person, or shaman, often ran in families. The ability to walk between worlds, to communicate with spirits, to heal and to see was understood to be inherited along with physical characteristics. A child born into a medicine family carried potential that others did not, though this potential still had to be developed through training and initiation. Let yourself sit around an ancient fire, smell the sage smoke, hear the drums and the chanting, feel the presence of ancestors gathering close, teaching, guiding, protecting. The elders taught that every person had a totem, an animal spirit that carried special medicine for them. But those from medicine lineages often had particularly powerful totems, or multiple totems, or connections to the ancient spirit beings who shaped the world in the time before time. The Native American understanding of bloodline was holistic. It included not just human ancestors, but relationships to place, to the land itself, to the animals and plants, to the entire web of life. To be descended from a particular lineage meant to carry responsibility for maintaining certain relationships, for preserving certain knowledge, for performing certain ceremonies. The Cherokee spoke of the Nunahi, spirit people who helped the tribe in times of need, and who were said to have mixed with Cherokee bloodlines in the distant past. The Hopi spoke of the ant people who sheltered the tribe during great cataclysms. The Zuni spoke of their ancestors emerging from the underworld. Many tribes preserved stories of star people, beings from the sky who came to Earth in ancient times, who taught the people important skills, and who sometimes took human partners. These stories parallel the Anunnaki narratives from the other side of the world, evidence perhaps of a universal human experience, or of universal human imagination, or of something that actually occurred in the deep past. You are floating now in the dream time, where all times exist together, where ancestors and descendants, past and future, merge into the eternal now. Among Aboriginal Australians, the concept of the dream time represents a parallel reality that exists alongside ordinary time, the eternal dimension from which all things emerge and to which all things return. The ancestors walked in the dream time, shaping the landscape, creating the laws, establishing the patterns that would govern existence. Each clan traces its descent from a specific dreamtime ancestor, a kangaroo, an emu, a snake, a particular feature of the landscape. This is not merely symbolic, but represents a living connection, a relationship of identity and responsibility. The clan carries the essence of their totem ancestor in their blood, in their consciousness, in their role within the greater community. The song lines, pathways across the continent marked by songs that describe the landscape and encode navigation information, represent another kind of transmission through time. The songs are taught from generation to generation, preserved with extraordinary precision across thousands of years. To know the songs is to carry the knowledge of the ancestors, to maintain connection to the dream time, to fulfill one's responsibility to the land and to future generations. In Africa, traditional religions maintain the importance of ancestor veneration. The ancestors were not simply remembered, but remained active presences, guiding and protecting their descendants, requiring offerings and proper behaviour in return. The living and the dead formed a continuous community, and the blood relationship created an unbreakable spiritual bond. Certain families held roles as priests, diviners, or keepers of sacred objects. These roles passed through bloodlines because the ancestors of those lines continued to work through their descendants, lending power and knowledge to those who carried their blood and honoured their memory. Breathe in the wisdom of indigenous traditions. Feel your connection to your own ancestors, whoever they were, wherever they lived, however they understood the sacred. Chapter 34. The Blood and the Grail. In the deep night of your rest, consciousness turns to one of the most persistent and powerful bloodline legends of Western culture, the Holy Grail and its associated mysteries. The Grail appears in medieval romances as a mysterious object, sometimes a cup, sometimes a stone, sometimes a dish, associated with Christ and possessing miraculous powers. Those who saw the Grail were healed of their wounds, fed with supernatural food, granted visions of heaven. Let yourself ride with the Grail Knights through ancient forests. See the mysterious castle appearing at twilight, the procession of the Grail through torchlit halls, the wounded Fisher King waiting for the question that will heal him and restore the wasteland. The Grail legends are layered and complex, drawing from Christian symbolism, Celtic mythology, and perhaps older mystery traditions. On one level, the Grail represents the cup used at the Last Supper, the vessel that caught Christ's blood at the crucifixion. On another level, it represents something more abstract: divine grace, mystical vision, the goal of spiritual quest. But some interpretations, particularly those that emerged in the 20th century, suggested that the Grail represented a bloodline, specifically the bloodline of Jesus Christ. According to this theory, Jesus married Mary Magdalene and had children. After the crucifixion, Mary Magdalene fled to France, carrying Christ's child within her. This child and its descendants were the true Grail, the San Grail, the Holy Grail, but also Sangreal, royal blood. This bloodline was preserved and protected through the centuries, its secret guarded by various groups including the Knights Templar. It allegedly merged with European royal families, particularly the Merovingian dynasty of France, which surrounded itself with legends of sacred kingship and mysterious powers. Your breath is barely perceptible. You are so deep in rest. These legends wash through you like moonlight through water. Mainstream scholarship has found little historical evidence for these claims. The Gospels do not describe Jesus as married, and the earliest Christian sources present him as celibate. The theories connecting the Merovingians to Jesus rely on questionable medieval documents and speculative interpretations. Yet the legends persist and fascinate. Why? Perhaps because they represent a Christianized version of the perennial bloodline mythology. The idea that divinity flows through human genetics, that certain families carry sacred lineage, that spiritual power and authority have a biological dimension.